Ian Rappaport tweeted out a general schedule for the NFL. What would training camp look like under the NFL's latest ramp-up proposal is what he tweeted. This was Tuesday. Testing and physicals for 5 to 6 days.
Would you see how that works? You test, then you go home for 2 days, and then you get to come back?
So you have to get 2 negative tests in order to get in.
And you kind of have to quarantine for 2 days. Like, you don't get those 2 days. You're not there with the team.
Working out, right.
There is no. I mean, are the coaches there by themselves?
So then strength and conditioning plus walkthroughs on day 12.
So 5 through 12?
And off day, yeah, well, it's 5 to 6 days, so it might count some of those quarantine days.
Okay, got it.
Day 13 is an off day. Day 18, then from day 14 to day 18, so 4 days of ramping up with helmets.
OTA type practices.
Day 19, you're off. Day 20, the pads go on.
Well,
which, as you like to say, last I checked, the games get played with the pads on. And you're basically saying 3 weeks before we put pads on.
Well, here's the other thing. Typically, let's say let's just use the date they're reporting, the 28th, the veterans report. The schedule before, it's usually 3 days and then the pads come on, right? The veterans have a couple OTA type practices with the rookies, and then the pads usually are on because that's usually the first practice you and me attend would be like July 31st or August 1st would be a full padded practice. And now that feels like, just off the top of my head, you're more in like July 13th, 14th, right? You're talking pads on. And which I don't push back necessarily. I think this is probably the right way to do when you factor in you have no clue who's in shape, who's not in shape. It would be negligent, naive, ignorant, and potentially harmful to your team to just put pads on these guys right away, right? Because you get injuries at practice on a normal training camp practice, padded practice, when guys have done everything normal leading up for 9 months, right? So you want to limit craziness. Now, you could argue a football practice, you can do it any way you want as a coach. Like, you don't have to do 11 on 11 with your first teams. Like, you can manipulate a practice any way you want. I think when you look at the NFC West, though, Guy, this is where it really, like, when we talk about the league, it's a little difficult, but when we kind of go in a magnifying glass here and just look at the NFC West, I think this really benefits Seattle and San Francisco in the division, because when you look at the NFC, you look at the Arizona Cardinals, who a lot of people have kind of been like, when they talk about the NFC West arguably being the best division on paper, their improvement is a huge factor, right? They draft Isaiah Simmons. They trade for DeAndre Hopkins. They have this young quarterback. Well, their defense is terrible. How are they going to get any better on defense without being able to tackle? Isaiah Simmons is a chess piece. He's not just plug Ray Lewis in and let him make tackles. That's not the thing with him. And then with receivers, what do you often say? Well, the timing with the new wide receiver, I mean, Brady and Gronk and Brady and Randy Moss and Peyton Manning and all his guys, it takes years to get on the same page. He's been working with Deshaun Watson now for 3 or 4 years to go with Kyler Murray, who throws a much stronger ball. Like, there's got to be something to that. Here's the other thing with DeAndre. He's not a fast guy. They got to get on the same page. And then I look at the LA Rams. They lost a bunch of players. They had Littleton went to the Raiders. They lost Wade Phillips, so new defensive coordinator. They have new running backs. There's just a lot of moving parts there that I go, I understand McVay and their offense. I'm less worried about their offense, but their defense, they have a brand new defensive coordinator. Where I look at Seattle and I look at the 49ers and I go, no turnover, same coach. Pete's been there way longer. You could argue Pete and the Seattle is the most equipped of the group, right? The GM, the head coach, on the same page. They picked every player.
Yeah,
they have Russell.
But I would say
the Niners have a better roster.
The 49ers I would put them on equal footing. Would you?
The Niners have a better team.
Could you play devil's advocate and argue the teams who rely on physicality, running the football, could be injured a little bit by the lack? I don't mean injured like physically injured. I mean just hurt by the lack of padded practices building up. But the counter would be they don't really do a lot of that stuff, A, anyway, and B, what requires more repetition and timing, the run game or the pass game?
The passing game. Does Pete benefit at all? Does Pete wouldn't you say that Arizona is going to be the most pass-happy team of the group when you just look at the coach's history, right? In theory, he'd want to pass it every play, right? They literally just traded their overpriced running back because they're like, we're not using this guy. Where you'd say, and that's where the Rams I'd put on a much higher level than the Cardinals. I just think the Cardinals, for a coach that never won more than 7 games, who I think just casual NFL people just go, and we all hear this, I think Cardinals are going to be pretty good. A lot of their players are going to get drafted in fantasy. There's going to be a team people are keeping an eye on. The Niners play them week 1. They really do not benefit from this. Now, my pushback would be, and I was just thinking about this with Pete Carroll, if I'm going to factor in Pete Carroll, I got to factor in Cliff Kingsbury. They are used to running a camp without games, right? Cliff was when you're a college coach. Like, you don't have preseason games.
Yeah.
Now, you typically, and you've covered college football, they have padded games, right? They usually have like 2 legit scrimmages. Like, and we did this at Fresno State. I would imagine, do most Pac-12 teams do like legit scrimmages?
Yeah,
in
most
August?
teams do. Now, even their spring game, sometimes the one that's on TV is not the most physical of the 2. Sometimes they'll do 3, like in the spring, and then when you get to August,
I'm talking about in August.
Yeah, I mean, they'll do a couple.
Did they have spring ball? Did any of these teams have spring ball like in college?
Yeah, some of them did, yeah.
Some of them did get it in. Where in the NFL, no one had anything, right?
Right. Yeah, I think the other part of all of this that's going to be, this is not something that you can say is going to benefit the Niners or the Seahawks or anybody else. I've referenced this a few times, but I actually went back and found one of the studies in some journal of orthopedic medicine. Read the summary, didn't read the whole article, the whole research study.
Was it one of those PDFs? It's like 45 pages. You're like,
like
this is not going to happen.
Between 1997 and 2002 in the NFL, 31 Achilles tendon ruptures were recorded for an average of 5 Achilles ruptures per year. Feels actually kind of low, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In the first 12 days of training camp following the lockout in 2011, there were 10 reported Achilles ruptures and 2 more in the first 2 weeks of the preseason. So they had 14 Achilles ruptures between training camp starting and week 2 of the preseason, where previously they had 31 from 97-02. So I do think the less stuff you do at full speed, and clearly there's just going to be less stuff happening at full speed, there are going to be some curveballs out there. Some team who we think is good, I think is going to have its season totally derailed in the first 2 weeks of the regular season, because we're just going to see some – I think we're going to see an injury rate that's higher than normal.
So you think it's fair to say –
based on the lockout data, when they had less time to prepare.
Wouldn't you imagine then some Achilles are going to happen early on in the NFL season in some games?
Yep, that's what I'm saying.
Guys are going to go down.
Yep.
And it actually might happen in camp too, like the first couple days when teams attempt to go. Once they feel like they've eased in maybe like day 25 and you're still 2.5, 3 weeks away from opening, week 1, you try to do a quote-unquote full speed one-on-one. And what do players often say? Training on your own, like you or me go for a jog, and you're like, God, I just ran a pretty long way. And then if we just went up to play pickup basketball, you're like 2 points in, you're like, I can't feel my lungs. All these players, and someone tweeted at me if they asked, do I think a lot more injuries are going to happen today? And my overall thought process is I do think players on the whole are very focused on their training regimens, right? And I don't think that a lot of guys will come in out of shape. But there is that just disconnect of you can only do so much with your trainer, with your kind of couple groups. It's different when you're out there repping every day. If you're Nick Bosa going up against Trent Williams, right? On top of doing your lifting and normal shit that you just can't account for.
Right. And
you just got to hope and pray if you're a fan of the Niners, a fan of any team, a coach, that is sad to say, but your Achilles is your 5th rounder, not your star player, right? And it's just you don't know. Because I think it's fair to say we're going to have probably 10 Achilles injuries by mid-September. And I would, 5, 6 in training camp when they get amped up, and then another in the first couple games. Because that level then, no preseason games, right, of 11 on 11 against your own team, and then those first 2 weeks against another opponent is just – because there is something to be said about I got a couple series in a preseason game. I just got to go full go, and I got the feel of it. That's kind of scary. But it's just these are the cards we're dealt, right?
Yeah.
For the Niners, to me, you can just list the 5 or 6 players. It can't be. If it's any of the other ones, you can live with. I mean, it can't be Jimmy. It can't be Nick Bosa. It can't be Trent Williams. It can't be Richard Sherman. That's maybe Fred Warner
I
and
think
George Kittle.
George Kittle, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably start with George Kittle and then work our way back.
That's right.